Hello, everyone, and welcome. So great to see so many familiar faces and also see some new names as well. Just to let you know, I had, I want to say half a dozen of you that were asking questions about coach training. So I'm going to cover it a little bit here, and I'm going to give you some options for accessing more information. On top of that, I do have something for each and every one of you here. So thank you for joining us. So glad to have you as part of the conversation. We've got a quick 30 minutes, and what we are talking about is making the case for coaching. So the target is within an organization or a company. Some of you do coaching, and you will find pieces in here that are helpful for conversations with individual clients or prospective clients. So what are we going to cover? We're going to talk about both quantitative and qualitative measures of return on investment. We'll talk about coaching as a tool to meet company objectives. We'll review coaching model and process. We're going to talk about getting started with a coaching program, resources available to you, and then of course Q&A at the end. So first off, I'm going to start by sharing the definition of coaching. This comes from the International Coach Federation. And the reason it's so important is in this context is because so many companies, when they talk about coaching and coaching programs, remain unclear on what coaching really is. They interchange the words of mentor and coach. They feel like it's a management function, and it's really a very different role. One of the things we're starting to talk about is clarification. Coaching is a skill set. Coaching is also a type of culture that companies want, and coaching is a profession. And as a profession, of course, that's completely different. So that's where it's so important to have the definition. So when you're talking about coaching within the profession, whether it is business, career, executive life, or wellness, according to the ICF, the International Coach Federation, coaching is partnering with clients. So I love that word partnering. It is very different than advising or coming in as the expert. A mentor and a manager are the advisors and the experts, and they give direction. A coach is a partner. And it goes on to say, a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. Okay, so when we talk about ROI in coaching, what's important there? First off, one of the big conversations companies are having is about employee engagement, and they're measuring that. And one of the reasons they're measuring that is because they've found it impacts their bottom line, which makes sense. When people are engaged, they're energized, they're more productive, they get more done, they're more excited about it. So of course they get a better result. Well, Gallup poll did surveys on employee engagement to back this up. Business units that are in the top half on employee engagement double their odds of delivering high performance. Companies in the top 10% on employee engagement best their competition by 72% in earnings per share. Now, you're saying, okay, wait a minute. This is engagement. Where's the connection? Coaching is a fabulous tool for employee engagement, because whether it's individual coaching where you're working with people on how to enhance their own career, how to advance, how to be more effective, etc., or group coaching where you're engaging the people on a project, on a team, in how they're doing what they're doing, as a tool, coaching increases engagement. Now, let's keep going. Manchester Inc. I'm guessing most of you have seen this study. It's been around, and it's one of the commonly cited studies. Please know there are many more. Metrics Global is another example. When Fortune magazine did their article on this, and they looked at all the different studies, they gave an average return on investment of 600%. So Manchester Inc. and Metrics Global, when they published their studies, they talked about quantitative versus qualitative. Important to know the difference between the two, because in quantitative studies, you're looking at numbers. Now, what numbers are available to look at? I think one of my favorites was, and I'll share it with you now, Triad Performance Technologies. And they looked at coaching for regional and district sales managers in a telecom organization. And they said 10 to 1 return on investment, 1,000% in less than a year. And guess what? That number is based on sales. So it's quantitative. You can actually measure sales numbers. Inside of a large organization, additional things that are often measured are the cost of turnover, because when you have coaches working with leadership and management, they are far more effective at interacting with their people and making those conversations work, which means they reduce turnover, and that saves the company a ton of money. So it's a quantifiable return on investment. There are other metrics that are measured: engagement, productivity, etc. So business outcomes, when you have coaching, are going to bring in both quantitative and qualitative results. Top performing staff being retained. So that actually has both sides of it. A lot of companies really want to know the qualitative. How much does it cost us if we lose these people? The positive work environment is more of a soft measure, a qualitative thing. We can all look at that and say, okay, I know that's going to impact the bottom line. The key to it is, how do you actually measure that? So sometimes internal metrics help companies in justifying, hey, yes, this makes sense. It's giving us that return on investment. So knowing what that is. Improvement in customer satisfaction. You can measure the number in terms of the rating scale from customers on their satisfaction. The question is, how does that impact the dollar amount of earnings? Now, revenue increase, that's an easy one to measure. You can look at what it is with and without. Now, having said it's easy, keep in mind there are multiple factors. So you've really got to work at what other factors are at play and what part of that was because of the coaching. Okay. Coaching ROI looked at in a training compared to coaching, and they're looking at productivity. So this is an internal metrics. When you do a training program alone, productivity goes up 22.4%. When you do training plus coaching, productivity goes up 88%. Okay, 4 times the impact. This is in a study by Public Personnel Management. So when you have that kind of an impact, you're going, oh, wait a minute, what's that from? How's that happening? Well, training is great because it provides information. Training plus coaching means you're going to that person who got the information in the training and you're saying, what did you get? How are you applying that? And then you're following up with them. How's that working? What are you going to change? And that's where you get the difference in productivity by adding the coaching element. Amoco Corporation, which is now part of British Petroleum, actually evaluated their coaching program over a 10-year period. And just having set that up, I'm going to pause for a second. A couple of you were talking about making the case inside your organizations for this, and you wanted that information. So before we started, while I was waiting and letting all of you get logged in, I was looking at some of the pieces of information out on the website and just doing a Google search on coaching programs inside of companies. And it came up in a Trendsetter article and a couple of different places. And it's fascinating how common coaching programs really are. So for those of you that are asking that and wondering about that, there's a few examples here, and I'm going to encourage you to go out and find more because they're there, they're on the internet, And what that does for you is give you a chance to find those studies in companies within the industry you are in, because that is going to be powerful and impactful when you're making your case. Okay. In this study, looking at Amico, the investigators reported that compared to other managers, coaching participants consistently demonstrated improved performance, increased ratings of potential for advancement, and 50% higher salary increases. The participants themselves directly attributed this to the coaching. Now think about what that means in terms of the culture inside the organization. Think about what that means in terms of talent retention, because it's powerful. So I mentioned this study before. Fortune magazine. The reason coaching is getting so much attention in so many different organizations is because it works, and that 6 times the 600% ROI, that's a number that has you asking, how can you not have a coaching program? The impact is so significant. Of course it makes sense. Now, go further into this. Think about what's going on inside of an organization. You've got leadership, and then there's a disconnect between leaders and their people, between leaders and what they want to have happen and what's actually happening inside the organization. So insight behind that. I'm guessing many of you have seen these studies. Gallup poll. Number one reason people quit their job is because of their boss or their supervisor. You've heard it. They don't leave the company. They leave who they report to. Another example of that, and please note, this was done in 2011. 2011 was a down economy. And at that point in time, 84% of workers wanted to leave their job in a down economy. Now, they were unable to leave their job because they had to have the income. So what does that mean to the company? They've got most of their people don't want to be there, and yet they're there. And of course, that's going to impact productivity. It's going to impact engagement. It's impacting the bottom line. And most commonly, if we start putting this information together, it's going to go back to this. You've got bosses and supervisors that are unaware of how they are impacting their people. And so coaching makes sense as a tool for them so that they really are engaging their people and motivating them. Let's go on to say this, okay? Right Management put this out there. 86% of companies use coaching to sharpen the skills of future leaders. Now here's another one for you. Dennison said it's the organizational development tool of choice for leaders and emerging leaders. Okay, so what is it about coaching that makes it such a powerful tool in management? So think about having the conversation with somebody. How does coaching actually work? Well, first let's describe the relationship, and I'm going to use the coaching model to do that, because that relationship is what's so powerful in terms of getting results. And we'll talk about the process as well. So we're going to relate the relationship to a staircase. That's our analogy. Now imagine you're going to build a staircase. The first thing you do is put the framework in place. In a coaching relationship, what does the framework consist of? Well, if you want to be successful and support client success, you start with training. And it's funny, every once in a while we still get the question, hey, do you really have to get trained to be a coach? And I'm amazed by that. At this point in time, I get it 10 years ago. Now I'm going, gosh, are you going to hire an accountant or a doctor or an attorney with no training? Of course you want somebody who's had training. It just makes sense. You want somebody who's developed competency in what they're offering. And you want to know they're accountable to a code of ethics. We've all seen so many different stories in the news where this becomes such a factor. So how does this work? if you're going to actually build the relationship, once you've got your framework in place, you're going to take it step by step. The first step in the coaching relationship is an agreement, a written agreement between the coach and the client that clarifies the roles of everybody involved, gives clarity on process, gives you the parameters, the boundaries in that relationship. And with that step in place, you're ready to build your next. It's understanding. It is the coach's job to understand the client. The coach understands who the client is, how they think, how they process, how they function. And a trained coach is going to have tools for that awareness, for that understanding. And in turn, they will flex the coaching process to the individual client. That sets up the next step of building rapport. Rapport is the #1 indicator of success in a coaching relationship. And with rapport in place, you truly open up the communication process. As far as the coach is concerned, that means listening. It means asking powerful questions. This, in turn, is supporting exploration on the part of the client. They're thinking about what the opportunities are, the pros and the cons. What are the potential barriers or challenges? How are they going to move past those? What are the resources they have to access? What are the implications? And through this exploration process, they will come to the step of developing their own strategies, which in turn leads them to the doorway. And that doorway is the success they want to achieve. So that's a synopsis of how the relationship works. Now let's talk actual process. In a coaching relationship, we know that company programs are best served if, #1, they have several coaches available. #2, they have internal coaches for entry-level to mid-level management, external coaches for the highest level of management, and the coachee is involved in choosing who they're going to work with as a coach. What that means is you want to have an introductory session where the coachee can talk to a few different coaches. Now, sometimes with your high-level executives, that's challenging simply because of time. And the way you address that is you provide bios of different coaches, you narrow it down and hand them a set number. So that introductory, the client or coachee choosing who the right coach is for them. From there, you're going to have an opening session. You're going to have an exploration of what the client wants. And the bigger and the broader the understanding of both the client and the coach, the more powerful, because then you'll know about competing priorities and influencing factors. In your second session, it is, hey, how are you going to maintain the focus throughout this coaching engagement, the client staying focused on the goals they want, and staying engaged, motivated to achieve what they want to achieve. We all have goals. And how often do you have a goal that 2 weeks later you don't even remember what it was? So we want that ongoing focus and engagement in it. Now, in a typical coaching session, the client prioritizes what they want to work on. The coach supports them with those steps in terms of developing their strategies and from there refining their specific action plan. And of course, checking in with them on their progress along the way and acknowledging and celebrating progress and success. The typical coaching relationship is 12 months. This does vary with internal programs. Please note, sometimes internal programs say, oh, we're going to do a couple of sessions. It can be helpful, and you're going to limit what you can achieve because creating meaningful change takes time. It's a process over time. So as you complete a coaching relationship and accomplish what is going to be accomplished in this relationship, it is on the coach to work with the client in terms of how they're going to continue this forward for the long term. And then in closing, evaluating what was accomplished as a result of this coaching relationship, ensuring that plans in place for continuing it, and hey, when is it time to come back and do more coaching, whether with the same coach or a different one. So that's your process itself, and it is built around the competencies of a coach. There are 11. These come from the International Coach Federation. So the first category of competency is setting the foundation. This is where you have the ethical guidelines and professional standards in place and establish your actual coaching agreement. Then, back to rapport being the number one indicator of success, your next two competencies as a coach are establishing trust and intimacy with the client and your coaching presence. The competencies of communicating effectively. It's interesting here. So often you have people inside the organization, yeah, I want to be one of the coaches in the program, and they have a lot of tremendous skills. And what's so essential if you're going to be effective in this coaching is that there's an understanding of how they're different in coaching compared to other relationships, because the listening, questioning, and direct communication in a coaching relationship is very different than what it is in a mentoring relationship. So knowing that and understanding that and applying that. From there, the competencies of creating awareness. This is challenging and expanding the thinking of the individual coachee, supporting them as they're designing actions, doing the planning and the goal setting with them, and then managing that progress and accountability. So very, very important skill set. Now let's go back to making the case for coaching. You've got some basic foundational pieces in terms of what it's all about. If you're going to start a coaching program, one of the first things you want to do is your research. Look at the ROI. You also want to research what it means to have a successful coaching program. What are the best practices? I'll give you an example. I mentioned earlier the training. Okay. Where do we do that training? What's the best practice there? Well, commonly companies create internal training programs, and best practices is external because the creation internally is typically done by people who are not coaches, who haven't been trained themselves. So there's all kinds of information available. You do want to outline what you're going to do with the program, where you're going with it. You want to get feedback on what's happening and define your specific action steps. So let's dig into this. When you do your research, part of what you're doing is creating buy-in. And the way you're creating buy-in is by providing those return on investment numbers, by sharing information on similar companies with coaching programs. Then that in turn moves you toward the actual planning. It makes sense, and then you're ready for implementation. To create buy-in, you start with your upper management. It will trickle down. You go on to middle management, and you really ultimately want to include everyone. So think about how you're communicating the information on the process. Next, in terms of planning, who's going to actually manage the program? How is it being done? Who are the coaches going to be? How are you training them? And what coaching are you providing for the coaches? Who are the coachees? How are they qualified to have this benefit inside the organization? And how are you matching them with a coach? And then your resources that are going to be available, information and experiences that go out to everybody. In terms of implementing a coaching program, you want to announce what you're doing. You want to partner with everybody involved. You want to support the people that are involved and have a process for evaluating what you're doing. So what's involved with that? Keep everyone informed, track the results, and report those outcomes to people. It's so important to them to have this information. Now, what are some of the different resources that are available to you for this? of course, the International Coach Federation, their website is coachfederation.org. I'll share that with you in a second. You also have for training, the Center for Coaching Certification, and for program support, outsourcing, also for bringing in coaches, the Center for Coaching Solutions. So the International Coach Federation is at coachfederation.org. Great set of information here. They approve training programs. They have membership standards, the code of ethics, and all kinds of research available. The Center for Coaching Certification providing the coach training at all the different levels, and then the Center for Coaching Solutions, whether you're outsourcing the design and development or simply tapping outside expertise to design and develop a program. When you want external coaches for your organization in addition to whoever you have internally. Articles and publications. There's a blog available with lots of information. We publish a book every year with all kinds of expertise. Chapters in these books come from people that have started coaching programs in global organizations, all the way across the board to, hey, on an individual level. So great insight and information there. And then, of course, these free webinars we do. We are available to you if you want to call or send an email and get some quick questions answered. As a matter of fact, just to let you know, also have a white paper available, and that white paper is called Starting and Running an Internal Coaching Program. So it's got some great information available. It gives you a lot more detail and example documents, building on what we've talked about and covered here today. So if you want to outsource support on your coaching program, training, or coaching, definitely want to be available to you. So first off, start with an initial conversation. Hey, I just want to ask some questions. I'm doing my homework. I'm doing some exploration. Then you start choosing your own resources, planning your process, implement your strategy, and get the results that you want. I want to make sure that I am opening this up for question and answer. So some of you submitted questions ahead of time. I also want to give you a couple of options now. If you want to raise your hand, I can unmute you and I can take your question live. So there are lots of you, we'll just unmute you individually for that. So raising your hand is important. And you can also type questions in the question panel, and I'm happy to answer those as well. I do realize we have just a few minutes left in terms of the time we have scheduled. So please take advantage of that. Make sure you're giving me your questions. Okay, so one of the questions submitted ahead of time that I'm going to go back to while I'm giving you time to type in questions is how to use coaching to meet company objectives and initiatives. So I love that question, and it's going to pull from much of what we've covered today. So the first thing you want to do is define specifically the company objectives and initiatives. What are they? And then start thinking about all the different resources for meeting those objectives and initiatives. And from there, explore, okay, where does coaching fit? How does it work with the other resources are there? How is it a completely different and additional resource? And get specific. So obviously it varies depending on what the company is, what industry, and what those objectives and initiatives are. Coaching is an incredible tool for empowering people to really explore and think outside the box, come up with the solutions, figure out how they are meeting those objectives and initiatives, and then of course that accountability for the follow through. So it's a great tool in so many different ways. Really good question. I appreciate that one. And let's see. So I realize, yeah, we're pushing up against time, and I appreciate those thank yous that are coming in. Thank you as well. So glad you were here. I am hanging around to answer additional questions, whatever else you want to know. and look forward to being of service. Oh, yes, I will be emailing you a link. So the recording from today's conversation will go up on our YouTube channel, and I'll send you a link to that. If you do want to schedule 30 minutes, an easy way to do that is reply to the email with the link, and I'll give you a way to access my calendar and schedule directly. So excellent. All right, so I had a question. Most coaching relationships last 12 months. How do you charge for this? What format do you charge? So that's a great question. And what I'll tell you is, because I know you graduated from the program, on the coach login page, we have, for those of you that graduated, a recording on business, a recording on marketing, and then we do a free Q&A call every month. So there's a lot of great information there. In addition to that, what I can share with you is research that has been done by the ICF. So first off, the type of coaching changes how much you charge and the format you do it in. So for example, life coaching and career coaching tend to be 100 to 200 per session, and it's charged individually. Business coaching moves into the 200 to 400, and executive coaching 400 to 600 per session. And in those cases, you're typically charging to the business or the organization. You do want to have that conversation with the company ahead of time. Typically coaches are saying payment in advance. Some companies work on a net 30, 60, or 90-day time period. So get those questions answered on the front end and include that in your agreement in terms of what's being charged and when it's being charged. Keep in mind that when you work with a large organization, oftentimes they have many different individuals that are being coached. So as a coach, what we do, and those of you that did the Master Coach class, you're aware of this, we have what we call a master service agreement we sign with the company, and then we attach what's called a statement of work defining who the clients are, how many sessions have been approved, at what rate. And so all of the information is addressed in that type of an agreement. And the agreement you have with the individual being coached is the actual coaching agreement. So hopefully that's covering all the pieces. Actually, a couple of questions were coming in on that one, and I'm hoping I've addressed them for you. So it looks like we've covered what you want to know. Glad, again, to see so many different people saying that this was helpful and good insight for you. Super glad to see you here and to get that feedback. I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to all of you for being here, for your time and your interest, and please let us know how we can be helpful and support your ongoing success. Make it a great one, everyone.